And the first time I actually came across your name was in a blog post that you had written about your experience, which so resonated with my own, of meeting the gray whales in the lagoons of Baja California on the Pacific coast of Mexico, which was one of the most beautiful and transformative experiences of my life. And when I read your words and I realized that at an earlier time, you had had the same experience. And I wanted, and I've never really taken the time to ask you more about how that unfolded for you and how it has resonated into your life ever since. This encounter, which is so intimate, so immediate, with this extraordinary great being, which is the gray whale, in a place where they come together to mate and to give birth.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Eleanor. Likewise, I discovered you through your book, Eyes of the Wild, which is one of my all-time favourite books. Quite honestly, it just touched me in such a deep way and taught me so much. And resonated, as you have observed, my own experience. So I grew up in North London, very much an urban kid in the 60s there. But I was very lucky in the sense that my dad's parents were Irish. And so every summer from this urban landscape, we would go to right out into Connemara, and we would spend 3 weeks on boats, making fires on the islands of Loch Corrib, discovering ancient ruins of Celtic churches on Inchigail, this magical place that's now a tourist destination, or was. And so I kind of had a double life, which was a life of being wild for a few weeks every year, and then the rest of the time a London kid. And I think that wildness just went into my blood very deeply. And so before my husband Tim and I had kids, we said, right, we're going to do one last really exciting adventure. Excuse me, one of my wild animals has just come in the room. We're just, and is talking. No, you be quiet.
The wildness of your voice now, Maddie.
Yes, woof woof. And so we went, and our dream was to meet the grey whales in San Ignacio Lagoon, specifically in Baja. And so we took a small charter boat, because this was like late 80s, and Baja, the lagoons are very carefully licensed, and whale watching wasn't a really big thing around the world. It was mainly American people taking the trip. We were the only English people on the boat. So we took a charter and we went to San Ignacio Lagoon. And because I'd grown up, steering outboard motors on skiffs, it was like second nature. So they used to let me take the helm of the small skiffs and go out. And they'd always say that the friendlies you could never find a friendly by willing an encounter. They had to come to us. And they said, you take the helm, Maddie, because when you have the helm, they always seem to come. And they did. And one time a baby with its mother were really close to the boat. And these are huge, small skiff, maybe 3 meters long max, probably smaller. And this massive creature. And the baby dove down under the boat and just clipped the underneath of the boat, and everyone was standing up trying to take pictures of this close encounter, and I was just holding, standing at the back by the outboard motor. It was switched off, we were drifting, and as it came up, you know, everyone kind of like, oh god, we're going to go overboard, which was, you know, lightly. And as it came up, I was literally 3 feet away from the eye of this being. And it's still very emotional. And I had this utter, I can only call it a revelation, that I was looking into the eye, not of an animal, but of an ancient consciousness, far more ancient than me. And that it had such a profound intelligence, and awareness and consciousness. And we, you know, we were brought up, I was brought up to think that animals were animals. And, you know, we had dominion, and that we were the top dogs in the pyramid of consciousness, and everything was below us. And from that moment, I realized the arrogance of that, and that that consciousness is very relative. And it completely and utterly changed my life from that moment, because I think I was quite conventional in some ways. You know, I'd been educated by Quakers and always a bit of a rebel, and I'd done a literature degree and read widely about the human condition, but it never quite occurred to me that there was this whole sentient world out there of more than human consciousness, and that certainly at that time some of it was obviously far bigger than mine. And this was nearly 40 years ago now, but as I've lived and grown older and had different encounters, I've learned that it's not just whales, you know, it's all our relations, as the First Nation people say, that hold a more than human consciousness, and that is what weaves the web of life. And also that is the basis of reciprocity that you've mentioned to me before, that we have to surrender our dominance in order to receive and enter into this reciprocity. And when we do that, we can be taught. And it's a very profound turning point in our journey ourselves, in our own growth and in our own understanding of our place in the web of life. So it all began with that baby whale just tipping the boat and coming up so close to my face. I was holding on to the outboard motor because I was pregnant and I didn't want to go in the water or hurt myself, and leaning forward as it came up. It was just extraordinary.
And when you speak about this, and it just resonates so perfectly with my experience. And when you speak of it now, it's as new, it's as present as it was then. The time that seems to intervene vanishes. And I can once again feel that beautiful expansiveness of what it is to be alive in a human body. Not a separate being, not just the content of my mind or my desires, my hopes, my ambitions, but an openness to this expansiveness of creation. And when, you know, I had this meeting, it's exactly as you describe it, in that it was given. We were on one particular day that was very calm in one of those small, they call them pangas in the lagoons. And we were with our Mexican, you know, guide, and with myself and my husband. So there were 3 of us in that boat. And when the mother came with her baby, she stayed with us for an hour and a half. And the Cuco, who was our guide, he said, the time seems so short, he said, but actually she's been with us all this time. And it was such a deliberate coming towards us and an invitation, let's meet each other. And she did what you did. It was the mother who made the eye contact with me. She turned on one side and I was looking into the water, and that glance that just came right into me just opened me up to the beauty of her inner being, in a way that, you know, even when I speak about it now, I'm touched again. And I feel humbled. I feel humbled, not in a way that makes me feel small at all. I feel humbled with gratitude and with appreciation, and with the realization, I think, that for me, it was an awakening into the love that unites all creatures in their way, in their various forms. And I feel with you that this recognition is something that we're being called into this now. You know, we're being called into it by the animals who've come to us, to you and to me, by the honeybees who are revealing more and more of the secret wonders of their lives, of the many varieties of conscious presence that are making the world that we inhabit. It's all arising in different forms of consciousness. And that diversity, for me, that diversity of consciousness is part of the sacred nature of the world. And we're being invited into a renewal of sacred relationship. As our indigenous, you know, ancestors, we all have indigenous ancestors, you know, in the past and now, they all tell us that we live in a sacred relationship, which is the weaving of the fabric of life. And for me, you know, when I had that sense of meeting, it was very healing, because I'd actually witnessed whales die. I'd seen them die, and it was really a wound that I was carrying, and I was carrying this wound not only of the whales that I'd seen die, but of other whales that that were, and this wound of the natural world. It was really a pain that I felt, and something about that meeting was like a reassurance that there is a dimension to the natural world that is greater than the physical. It is not only about flesh, blood, bones, or the material existence. There is this essence of being that cannot be destroyed. And I've kept that with me ever since. And I would say that that is, you know, one of the most healing gifts that I've ever had, really, because I wanted to apologize to the whales. You know, when I went, I wanted to really say, sorry. And it didn't come into my mind for a moment. It was, you know, in the power of the whale's presence, that thought just became really small and vanished. And in its place was given this assurance that life is greater than we think it.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's one of the keys. I think as we navigate this strange world we're in, I mean, I'm locked down, you're in France, you're in confinement, which is kind of interesting medieval context. You're about to give birth in some way. And I think this is one of the deep keys of the crisis that's going on in the world at the moment, that COVID is forcing whole societies to pause, and creating this opportunity for a sort of rewilding of the soul, and a much more time to, you know, when we have so few choices about what we can do, the one thing we can do is go outside. And whether we're in a city or a town, seeing a flock of long-tailed tits in a tree, or lucky enough to be in the woods, you know, with a close encounter with a deer, those opportunities are open to us as human beings. And I think it will only, I know from personal experience that whenever I have a close encounter, I feel so much joy. I had a close encounter with a nuthatch on Sunday, creeping up a tree, such beautiful little birds, and my heart just swelled. You know, it doesn't have to be the drama of a grey whale in a primeval, uninhabited lagoon in Mexico. It can be something more modest, you know, in our human judgment, but no less powerful.
It's no different. It really isn't. We were speaking about bees earlier on, and I believe you have some hives. And
I do. I have a top bar hive, and I have 4 national, you know, the square boxy hives. So I keep bees, I try to keep them in the most natural way possible that I possibly can. Our bees are swarms that we've captured from local feral bees. So they're quite brown. They're not black bees, so they're not native black, but they're highly adapted to the South Downs where I live. And we keep them with the minimum of interference. We do take honey, but only when we know that they'll have enough food for the winter. So we run a brood box plus a super full of honey through the winter, and we're trying to keep feeding to an absolute minimum. We don't requeen for productivity. We try and let them, you know, success their queens in their own time. We put bait boxes out to catch swarms, and I try not to be too draconian about cutting out queen cells, because when hives requeen, it breaks the Varroa cycle. There's less babies. The Varroa love to inhabit the cells with the young brood. That's where they go to suck. And when you have a break from a queen laying in the warmer months, it allows the bees to, you know, they haven't got so much food, natural food for the Varroa to feed on, so it breaks the cycle, and it's nature's way of controlling it. So we try and be completely organic and not chemically treat. And also, if a colony is failing, sometimes it just needs to fail. And we try not to, and we don't bring in new genes, you know, bred queens. We want to have as natural local bee system as possible. But bees are, again, you know, we think of them as insects and we call them bees in the plural, but really bees are bee, you know, they are one organism.
Yes.
You know, they're a completely different consciousness to us. They have an extraordinary secret life in the hive. They do amazing things. And just to give you an example very quickly, 2 years ago, we had possibly, no, it was early this year. I'm sorry, I get my years a bit mixed up. But we had a very early spring in February, and the queens started to lay very, very early and fly and get ahead. And then we had a period of huge wet. And so the queens were laying new babies in February, March in our hives. And by our, I mean my other beekeeping friends in the area. And then suddenly they stopped. And we thought, oh my goodness, what's going on? Have we lost our queens? Systemically, you know, the bees had stopped. And we were kind of feeling, oh dear, should we be trying to breed more queens from eggs in other hives? Should we bring in queens? You know, so humans fussing about bees. And then by late April, May, we had this weeks and weeks and weeks of torrential rain, and the bees couldn't get out to forage. And I realized then that our bee colony had somehow known what the weather was going to be, and they didn't want to build up the population, because you can have 60,000 bees in a hive. They didn't want to build up the population, because then if they couldn't go out and forage, they'd potentially run out of stores, and the brood, the babies, would starve. So they had deliberately limited their population in a warm period, built up their stores, and then that allowed them to cope with this coming period of extreme rain and cool. And then as soon as it was over, they went into lay again and went into a different balance. And it just made me realize how incredible this is, a non-human intelligence that is no accident. And this wasn't just my hives, this was other, you know, we consulted in the area, we call it Bee Club. And it was a number of different hives that were, you know, this wasn't just one or two incidences. This was across Hampshire, possibly further, but certainly in Hampshire. So that I kind of thought, wow, respect, Maddie. And it taught me such an important lesson. You know, don't over manage, don't farm bees. Create the best circumstances for them possible, and the best habitat, and do plant the flower meadows and do whatever you can to optimize and make their lives comfortable as a deeply honored guest in your ecosystem. But don't fiddle and interfere with them thinking that you know best, because you don't. They know. So they've taught me, over the years, they've taught me many things. They've taught me huge humility when I've made foolish mistakes and been badly stung. Their venom is extraordinary as an experience. It's like our experience of it is you just have to go and sleep, and my goodness, do you go into an altered state with it? It can be, I'm not recommending people get stung on purpose, but it can be very shamanic, and you have to just surrender to it to get well.
Yeah.
And it can be very dream inducing as well, creates visions. But I've learned so much from them about respect and community and adaptation to unexpected climatic changes, which is why it's so important to leave them. They know how much honey they need. And of course they're very generous, deeply generous, but take too much and we really affect their health. So I just have as much respect for bee colonies as I do for whales. And I've had one or two experiences of being in the middle of a swarm while it's going into one of my swarm hives. And I've been covered in the smell of the pheromones that they emit to attract the colony to the new home. And it has a smell. I came into the house once and my daughter smelt it and said, "My God, you smell amazing." And it to say it smells like lemongrass is just like saying that Amrita from the gods smells of lemongrass. There is something utterly unworldly about it when you smell that smell of a swarm, and you see the bees' little backsides vibrating to push out the pheromone. And it's an incredible smell. And somehow when you're in the middle of perhaps 30,000 or more honeybees in this incredible murmuration, going into a hive, it's utterly ecstatic. It's as heart-opening as the close encounter with the grey whale. It's slightly addictive, actually. I really look forward to May. May onwards. It's such a phenomena. And the sound of it, it's like, it's just it's like being in the middle of a thunderstorm. That's another, again, non-human experience of weather that is utterly, like you said, humbling and enlivening. Life flows through you. You're blessed. We're blessed by these natural phenomena, and they are the secret to our happiness.
They truly are the secret to our happiness. That's, listening to you speak of this, of being in the thunderous murmuration of the bees, is a vibrating intensity of being alive that we're being invited into all the time. And as you were speaking about this, I remembered a very ancient it's actually, I think, a design on metal that comes from Crete, from the great goddess culture of Crete. And it shows, this beautiful feminine dancer with her flowing lines, the curves of her body, and above the waist she's naked. And she's wearing a beautiful skirt that is covered with, there are bees on the skirt. And she holds the double snake. She has a snake in each hand for these rising currents of life. And on her skirt, the bees are gathering. And this is the energy of a rising life, which, when we feel it in ourselves, and then it awakens a greater intelligence, as through relationship with all this magnificent, diversity of consciousness, of intelligence of life, our intelligence awakens, which is coherent with how life is and not destructive, as we're experiencing now. We're experiencing in a very acute phase, I think, of seeing how this separateness that we've made in ourselves between our conceptual mind, which is extraordinary, but when it's becomes a mechanism for dissection of separating life, then it turns into an instrument of destruction, not only for other beings, but for ourselves. And everything that we've been sharing now in this beautiful conversation has been about re-entering the unity and then raising our own aliveness and our energy, And I remember there was something that, you know, the great Thomas Berry said. Thomas Berry is, you know, has been for many years a wonderful guide and inspiration for me. Yeah. And he said, we know how much we need to change, he said, but we need to ask ourselves very, very carefully, where will we find the inspiration and the energy for the change that is needed? And those are not his exact words. They're what I've kept in my mind. And when I ask myself that question, you know, where will I, you know, find the energy in myself, you know, to work through the often feelings of helplessness, frustration, edging, despair, then it comes from this communion that we've been speaking about. It comes through this relationship.
And I would even take that further, and I would say that if our lineage of learning from wise people has been broken,
yes,
and so much of it is broken in our Western society, you know, we don't have, we mention First Nation people, and the fact that yes, we all have Indigenous ancestors, but the teachings of my Indigenous ancestors have been lost. And although that is in my DNA, in my blood, my consciousness didn't grow up connected to those teachings. It was the lineage was broken. And I once asked John Young from Eight Shields about that, and said, you know, what do we do when our lineage is broken? Because he's had so many teachers and has this sense of lineage. And he said, well, you know, the First Nation people teach us that when there are no wise elders in your society that are passing this on, or when you can't find them, the teaching is that all our relations, the more than human world, will step in and fill that, repair that broken lineage for us, and will become our teachers until we can find guidance in the human world. And so for me, the practice for me is, if I have a close encounter with a more than human consciousness, whether it's a hornet or a deer or a nuthatch, I always try to pause and reflect and ask, or the wind, or a thunderstorm, or whatever, you know, it doesn't have to be a mammal or a bird or an insect. And my pause is with the question is, what was I thinking of at that exact moment that I had that encounter? And what is this encounter there to show or teach me?
That's wonderful.
And I have to acknowledge that is from a teacher of mine called Agatha Manouche. So it's not my teaching, but that is a woven thread from her medicine teaching.
That's really beautiful. And again, it's something that feels very true to me, because I began asking, you know, as politely as I could. When I began to write, I began asking, not what do I want to say, but what do you have to say? What is it that I can bring for human ears that you wish to convey? And that was like a first step on the path of getting my personality, with all its, you know, inhibitions and flaws, just to the side for this time. And from a place in myself that is more peaceful and quiet, listen to the voices that do not come in words, but in the subtle messages of the aliveness of the entire world, of which I'm a little part. And I really I would like to tell you a story that I feel connects with this, and it's from the indigenous ancestors of North America. It's from, I believe, the Pawnee people, and in their beautiful story, the all the other animals and earth beings are always meeting in council, and they meet they're meeting in a sacred place. They're joined within the sacred place of the earth community, and they know what is everything that is happening, just as your bees know when is the time, you know, when is the time to prepare, when is the time to check their population, when is the time. They're because they are so in tune with this rhythmic patterns of life that they know, and the right action at the right time. And so the council of all beings is aware of how humans are on the earth, and they're aware of those people who are ready to receive other messages. And so when they know that it's the right moment, they send one of their members with a message, or with a teaching, or with a healing. And that is, I feel, what we've been really speaking about today, is that when we open to receiving that, then we're really making that step into the future that's needed. And it comes to us as a gift. We don't have to struggle so hard or try so hard. We can just be a little softer, a little more open to what life has to teach and to give us.
Yeah, exactly. And I do the same practice when I write an editorial for each issue of Permaculture Magazine. I always ask what needs to be spoken rather than what do I need to say.
Yeah.
Because there is a flow, and there are times when I write and that flow just comes through. And it isn't necessarily my planned thinking. It often isn't. It just comes through.
Yeah. Well, you know, I felt that as we're speaking today. I feel what's come through is what wants to be spoken.
Yeah.
That's a really beautiful experience.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, that's how we should live, isn't it?
I think it is too. And then
every day.
Every day. And then
every day.
And then the creation, we are part of the creation. And
exactly.
Yeah. And
we're in the dream.
We're in the dream. We're in the dream, and we're part of it. We're shaping it in our ways.
Yeah.
But we're part of diversity. We are consciously part of the diversity of the unfolding, and cherishing all its aspects, whether comfortable or not, whether what we consider beautiful or not, is not for us to judge.
And there has to be an unraveling in order for there to be a sort of bringing together of a more conscious way of living within the web of life.
Yes.
You know, somehow we have to dismantle and unravel all the difficult mess that we've created, both in terms of physical forms and thought forms too.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. But our first step is not to be afraid. And that's because when we accept that fear into ourselves, then we're blocking the opening that, we've been speaking about here. And then we can't receive the messages for the future. And then thoughts become compulsive. We've all experienced this, We live in a society where there's an addiction to certain type of thinking, and a certain language as well. So there's that came to me in it was a very beautiful story from, beloved Irish poet Seamus Heaney, who died, in 2013. And I was really touched that his last words in a text to his wife were, "Don't be afraid." And he actually sent it in Latin because it comes from one of the Gospels. Because when the disciples have closed themselves in, it says, in a room because they're afraid.
That's right. Yeah.
And the figure of Jesus appears among them, and the first words are, "Don't be afraid."
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the seeds and the flame of hope for me is in the great mystery of life.
Absolutely.
And the more than human world is the messenger of the great mystery for me. Yes. And I love the fact that we humans do not categorically know the future and can't even possibly imagine it. We can have, insights, but we can't fully form what's coming. And thank goodness, because then it would be restricted to the limitations of our thinking.
And the limitations of our plans.
and then we wouldn't have emergence. And when we have emergence, there's always the unexpected. The mystery is always contained in emergence.
So Maddie, when you were a little child and you were playing in the lakes of Connemara, did you ever imagine that you would be greeted by a grey whale, a grey whale baby reaching up to you while you were hugging the engine of your outboard engine, meeting eye to eye, consciousness?
And I never imagined that I would be standing in the middle of this unbelievable swarm of bees that had chosen to come to my garden.
Yeah.
Because they liked it. I never imagined that I would experience that sort of bee murmuration and smell that is like, the nectar of the gods. It's the only way I could describe it.
Yeah.
No, I never imagined any of these things.
Thank you so much. It's been really wonderful to speak. Really wonderful. And when we have this living conversation, a conversation that's alive, that's not planned, we didn't plan it, and we just, we allowed whatever wanted to speak through us to speak, then there's a raising up of our energy, a raising of our consciousness into this appreciation.
Yeah. So thank you, Eleanor, for everything that you do and for the things that you've taught me as well about animals. It's really touched my life.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.